Hey there everyone, and welcome to my video talking about the best runes for Night. Now this is very much in the current time, so if there are new runes which have come out, then I would have made an updated version of this video. Check the description first. If there's a link to a later one, then go watch that video instead. But if there isn't, then you're in the right place. Also, I want to say at the end of this video, I'm going to be talking about what the next videos are that I'm going to be releasing on this channel for KingsRoad. So if you're not interested in this video, but you want to know about what's coming soon, then check the description and there'll be a link to the end of the video. I have links to various points in this video for reference at a later time, and there'll be one link that goes right to the end where I talk about the videos that are coming up. So let's get into this video. You're going to make sure that you can read this. This is a presentation style, like my video that I just brought out for Knights, talking about all the different skills on the class and creating builds with it. You need to be able to read this, so if you can't, then switch to a bigger screen where you can read it. This video is going to go through a few different things. First of all, we're going to talk about the gold find runes. We're then going to talk about which is the best element on Night. We're then going to look at a table where I show all the notable runes for the class, and then I'm going to go through the skills skill by skill in-game, talking about the skill runes where I can actually show what these skill runes are and what they do. I'm going to show a couple of them in-game, but otherwise it's going to be just looking at the descriptions of the skill runes. And then lastly, we're going to look at how each element stands, what they have damage-wise, to kind of think about the future as well, in terms of what each element needs. So, started off, we're going to talk about gold find skill runes. Now I bring this up first because everyone who's new to the game, when they find out that gold find skill runes exist, they want to know what they are, they want to know how to get them, and basically there's only one which you can actually get. That is Greater Fire Maim. All the other ones are from festivals. There's actually a thread on the forum which will be more up to date if there are new skill runes which will come out than this video, because I will keep it updated with any new gold find skill runes that come out. We'll talk about wizard ones first of all, but the knight ones are down here at the bottom, and basically numbers 2 onwards are only available in festivals. Only number 1 is actually available in the game. Now, don't be too disheartened if you're new to the game and you're like, oh, it's not fair, the old people got the other gold find skill runes. Because those gold find skill runes took a lot to level up, an absolute ton. Plus, there's huge availability of gold find now in the form of jewels, which wasn't available before. So you're actually in better times for gold find than when these skill runes came out. So how do you get this one skill rune? Well, I'm going to show you in game now. It's not very obvious. It's kind of hidden. It's from the Fire Maim skill rune. Basically, you get this up to max level, and then you can evolve it into Greater Fire Maim, which then goes up to ultimately 75% gold find. So Fire Maim can be obtained very easily right now from the first dungeon. It's in the skill rune box down on the bottom right. You can see Fire Maim fragments here. Get 40 of those, you can make the skill rune, and then I'm going to show you how this works. This is called Legendary Skill Rune Evolution, and it's something which they added into the game but then decided to not really do much more with because it's a bit complicated, and you can't see that it's what skill runes it's available for. This is the only important one that you need to know. The other skill runes which have Legendary Skill Rune Evolution, they don't turn into anything important. So you've got to level it up all the way to max level, which I'll do now. I just realised I need more gold. Okay. Never ever do this in the game. It is not efficient to buy gold, but I'm on my test account, so I'm going to get myself some gold. I can hack it in, but I'm not going to show you how I hack it in, so instead we're just going to buy some here. Sorry for the delay. Okay, so back to this. So we can level this up to max. So you can see now, still doesn't have any gold find at Legendary, doesn't have any gold find at all. We're going to take it to max level. Now it's max level, Legendary level 5, and look, it can evolve. It can evolve into a fine quality Greater Fire Maim, which starts with the 5% gold find, and then that will go up higher. So this costs 1 million gold, 40 rune dust. It's like a normal evolution, and the stats reset on it, so it becomes pathetic again. But you're not doing this for the stats, you're doing this for the gold find. So leveling this up costs a lot of experience, and it takes a while before it actually gets a decent amount of gold find. You can see here it's gone up to 15% now at Superior. It goes up to 25% on Epic, 35% on Legendary. So half of the gold actually comes in the Legendary quality. But then, because of the way the experience works, it actually works out that it's kind of linear in terms of how much of the experience, how much of the gold you're getting for the experience you put in. But anyway, not important. The important thing here is that it actually takes a lot to level up. But this is how you get it. And we're now going to have a look at how much Screw-Runes take to level up. So, this is from my Screw-Runes guide on the forum, which is a very out-of-date guide that I was over-ambitious with and decided actually wasn't that useful for all the details, putting in the time I needed for it. So don't look at the guide, but the first page does have some useful numbers on it. And it has something like this table. So most of the Screw-Runes which you level up are category D or E, which means that the total experience they need is 172,000 or 259,000. The Gold Find Screw-Rune, first of all, you've got to go through Fire Maim before you get to Greater Fire Maim. So you've got to do the 115,000, and then Greater Fire Maim is 345,000. So in total, it's 460,000, which is quite a lot more than the normal Screw-Runes which you're leveling up. So I'm saying this now because bear in mind, if you're new to the game, then you may want to do some other Screw-Runes first before putting everything into Greater Fire Maim. Greater Fire Maim will also cost you quite a bit of gold, I believe, to level up compared to some of the other Screw-Runes. So bear that in mind and choose when you do it. I'm not going to advise when to do it, whether to do it first or later. A lot of people like to get things like gold find and storage space, that kind of utility stuff when they start a game in order to set themselves up well for the long run. And I like to do that myself. I highly recommend getting storage space, first of all, with your gems and that kind of thing. But in terms of choosing when to do this particular Screw-Rune, I'm not going to advise you. It's up to you which order you want to do it, when you want to do it. I'm just going to give you the numbers here and say it's quite expensive to level compared to other ones. And for reference, if you're playing the game each day and regularly and that kind of stuff, it takes roughly a month to level up a Screw-Rune which costs 172,000 experience. So each one is quite a big investment, and that Gold Find Screw-Rune will take you 2 or 3 months to get up before then doing other ones. So if you want to get a bit of combat stuff first, it might be worthwhile before then doing it. So now we've talked about the Gold Find Screw-Runes, we talked about the experience requirements on Screw-Runes, sorry. So the next thing we're going to do is talk about element. So which are the best elements on night? Well, I would say water and nature. Water being slightly better than nature. And in fact, what I would say is best is if you have a combination of water and nature. A lot of classes, they want 2 elements. When I say a lot of classes, Knight and Wizard, they want 2 classes. Archer can kind of get away with doing just one. But Wizard and Knight really benefit from having 2 elements. So they can get the most out of each of their skills. And for Knight, that is water and nature. If you only have one of them, water is slightly better than nature, which we'll get into as we talk about the Screw-Runes. So that's what I would say is the best. Shadow, I would say, is the best supporting element. It has a couple of Screw-Runes there which are pretty useful. It also has the Sunder Screw-Rune. Sunder only has one Screw-Rune right now, which is Shadow. So if you want to be using that as like a second maim or just a really big damage dealer, well, I say really big damage dealer. It does one big hit, and it's got a long cooldown. But anyway, Shadow's got a few bits to add. That's the kind of worthy of note element that you could have as well. Now, something really important to note here is fire is not mentioned. However, fire is a good element for the class. If you can't pick water or nature, if you can only pick one element, then fire is probably the next best element. It's just it's held back a little bit. It doesn't have the best Screw-Runes for a lot of things. Water and nature are better in a lot of regards, but if you have a fire build, which in the old days a lot of people have fire builds on every class, it was just the way you played the game is with a fire build, and so there are some old Knight fire builds, and they can do totally fine. They just don't have some of the stronger stuff that water and nature have. So when it comes to if you're playing the game right now, and right now there's not great access to elements, all you can do is grab either the 5 fire tri-stones in the shop or the 5 shadow tri-stones. So you've got to pick either fire or shadow really, and fire is the better one. Even though that shadow is the one mentioned here, but fire is not mentioned, I would say shadow is missing a lot of stuff. It's good supporting stuff, but it's not. You don't want your build built around shadow. Fire is actually the better one to go with there, and to try and make fire work. You can also try and make water work, because of Lord of Winter especially. That will help boost your water damage, and very early on it's good to do a water build. So trying to give you all the information here. I hope that's clear enough. Water nature is the best. Water's a little bit better than nature, but nature has some great stuff to add. Fire is a bit behind those two, but can work as your sort of main build. And then shadow, if you have all the good stuff, shadow is great for adding a little bit more. So now we're going to look at the big table. So very much like for Wizard and Archer, I've made a table which lists all the skill runes worthy of note for each skill. So if we can get this all on screen now, it's all on screen. Oh no, not quite. We're missing one line at the bottom there. Okay, so this is basically the table which you can come back to refer and find exactly what's there. If you're going to make notes on this video, write down which skill runes you want to level up, blah blah blah. This is the table to look at and to take notes from. Anything that's not mentioned on here is not worthy of note at all. All I'm really going to do here is point out how to read it, and then we're going to take a look at the skill by skill, looking at the skill runes in the game, because these are just names of the skill runes, and if you don't know them, then it's not much help. So first off, we obviously got the line which is the name of the skill. That's pretty self-explanatory. I go through them. I haven't got the Royal Blade skill here, and I haven't got the other advanced skills properly done because their skill runes haven't been developed that much. But it is worth noting that you can get shadow damage from the Sunder skill, you can get water or nature damage from the Sever and Reflect. So that's, the name there. The next line is best. So this is the best skill rune for each element, each skill. And it's kind of said without any extra detail. You'll see that for some of them I've got a star next to it. What that means is no matter what your elemental stats are, whether you're a different build, so say you're a fire build or a water build, you're still going to use the Sparkling Gift skill rune, even though it's a light skill, because it has some other effect that isn't really, it doesn't matter about the damage for it. So you can see I've got this for Sparkling Gift, I've got this for the Protector skill runes, so it's not really a damage skill, for Enrage as well, for Holy Shield, and then Frenzy and Lay on Hands and Energetic Form. So there's quite a few skill runes which you're going to use no matter what build you have. They're good skill runes to maybe get if you're unsure what build you're going to do as well. But anyway, so that's explaining that line. The next line is elements. Now this is purely talking about damage. So what elements can do viable damage for that skill. And I've tried to explain it reasonably well with here we're saying the water, nature and light. These are all viable skill runes that can do good damage. And fire has a viable one too, but fire is worse than the other three. Here, all of these are roughly equivalent in terms of dealing damage, so you'll use the one which is best on the element. But you can see here that Dual Scythe is better. Do that in comparison to say Whirl here, where we say fire, water and nature. They're all viable, and in fact they're all similar enough that they're worth saying all three are the best. You just pick the one which is either your build or best for the content that you're playing. And then there are certain skills where the elemental damage is not really what you're doing. So Demon's Rage here, it actually has no elemental damage on it. There's none. There's elemental damage from these, but it's not the reason why you use it. And there's no actual proper elemental damage you can get out of Frenzy. So there's none on there. So this is purely talking about elemental damage. If you're a fire build, you can look at, say, where you're going to get your damage from. There's here, there's fire here, there's fire here. So you can look at it like that. And then lastly, we have the others section. So the others section is noting the other skill runes which are not the best. They're not there for damage output. So they're not just for example, Cleave here, we've got this is the best. However, Fire, Water, Nature, there are skill runes for damage here which do good stuff. We're talking about the other effects which they might be useful for. So I'm going to go through these now. So the Aftershock Skurun got for farming. Consecration, this is basically the best stun Skurun. Each of the skills, well, the base skill does stun. The Skuruns add stun. However, this one adds a healer move speed. So if you're using the skill for stun, then this is basically the best stun Skurun. You can see here you pull in enemies. What other ones we got worthy of note? These ones are good for farming. A Blaze Soul is better than Lord of Winter if you've got no water skills, and that's pretty much it. So there we've explained how to read this. I hope that's clear enough. I'm not really going to talk through this anymore. I'm just going to take a second as I try and think if there's anything more I want to talk about. No, it's pretty much self-explanatory. You should be able to read this. This is for reference and stuff. So now we're going to take a look at these Skuruns in the game, where we can actually read what they do. So looking at Maim first here, we've got Flowing Blades. This is the best one, and if you compare it to the second best one, Primal Maim here, it becomes pretty obvious how much better it is than the other ones. So looking at the percentage damage here, on Flowing Blades you got the 279 plus 140. It does 2 hits weirdly. They're at the same time. It doesn't do a longer animation, so effectively it's just 1 hit of 420%. That 420% compared to 326% is enormous. It's quite a bit better than the other, a lot better than the other Skuruns here. And Maim in particular, you want to do massive damage with that 1 hit. So Flowing Blades is brilliant, and it's a big reason to be in water. If you use Lord of Winter, you use Enrage and stuff, get all your damage buffed up to then do 1 massive Flowing Blades. You can do a lot of damage in 1 hit. However, that said, I've put things like Primal Maim, and I believe it's the light one. I can't remember the name of the light Skurun now, but Radiant Maim. There we go. They're both definitely viable. They do good enough damage for this skill, makes it work and everything. It's just that Flowing Blades, obviously, it stands out better. But yeah, the other ones are viable. Often when you look at these Skuruns, it's like, and one stands out, it's like the other ones aren't viable because actually Flowing Blades is the one that makes the skill viable. But Maim here itself is a very viable skill. So Primal Maim and Radiant Maim are both work fine. It's just that Flowing Blades is a lot better. Now we're going to Cleave. So Dual Scythe is the best Skurun, and comparing it to if we compare it to Forest Cleave here. So Dual Scythe does 2 hits. Again, the animation is not longer. It's just randomly doing 2 hits rather than 1. You've got to add up those things. So the 97%, adding that up twice is 194, which is exactly equivalent to Forest Cleave. However, the static damage is more. So it stands out a little bit, but not by an enormous amount. It's definitely the best. It's just, if you're not a shadow build, if you're a nature build, you're not really losing that much because the nature one isn't much weaker. There's a fire one here. The damage over time with that fire on the ground does not crit, so it's useless. This is basically the same as Forest Cleave for damage. There's also a water one too, which is a little bit weaker. This skill is all about damage, so you go with the one which suits your build best and the content best. Charge here, Sparkling Gift. Now this is the obvious standout. The main reason is it pulls all the enemies into you, and that's just brilliant on Knight. It kind of sounds a little backwards because pulling enemies into you, they're going to attack you and kill you. However, Knights can just tank up and survive anything. So by putting them into you, it means that you can hit them with moves like Cleave and stuff. Now I talked about this in previous videos when talking about Knight, so hopefully you know that already. This Skurun is what makes it all work. It pulls the enemies in. It also slows them so they struggle to get away from you if they're trying to run away. It's excellent. And in PvP it stuns enemies, opponents, whatever you want to call them. And that is excellent for then holding them still so you can follow up with other attacks. You need to be in close range. So this skill just makes the class work really, really nicely. Now the damage from it is surprisingly high too, and in fact this skill is kind of a damage skill. The cooldown is low, it's only 4 seconds, so you can use it frequently. So if you're desperate for fire damage or that kind of thing, you can put Empowered Meteor Dash and actually have this as a reasonable damage skill. So there are a couple of Skuruns for that. There's Fire and the Nature. I believe they're just the only 2. So if you're a Fire or Nature build and you're really wanting to get some extra damage output, you can use either of those Skuruns for some damage. Looking at Hurl here, Dancing Toxic stands out by a long shot, and this is probably the main reason to have a nature build. So if we compare it to something like Lava Spread, it's not necessarily so obvious, but it should be obvious when I start pointing it out. So the damage it does with the initial hit is 159% plus 15,000. Compare that to the 167 plus 11,000. They're roughly equivalent. The damage over time, I can't remember if Lava Spread's crits, but the damage over time on Lava Spread is just not that much. However, the damage over time on Dancing Toxic is enormous. It goes for 5 seconds. I can't remember if it's 5 hits or 6 hits. Normally it's 6 hits with that kind of thing. So let's assume it's 6 hits. So that's 6 hits of 15,000, which is 90,000. Now at this time in the game, our damage stats are roughly about 80,000 or so. In the foreseeable future, our damage stats will be about 100,000. I like to think ahead a little bit with these things to kind of get a good scaling of what the damage is going to be soon. And so you can imagine 100,000 is the equivalent of 100%. So converting these numbers into percentage, on Lava Spread we've got 178% damage that you do with that, the fire. And on Dancing Toxic, we've got the 6 times 15,000 plus 15,000. That's 105,000. So 105% onto the 159, got 264%. So 264 compared to the 178, well, that's quite a big difference. Dancing Toxic does a lot more than Lava Spread. And in fact, this is, like I was saying earlier, with the case of Maim, Maim itself is fine with the weaker skills. Hurl is not so much. With Dancing Toxic, that's what makes Hurl brilliant. And on the other ones, they're fine, but they're not really quite so super powerful as when you use Dancing Toxic on this, because the cooldown is really low. It hits a lovely area. You can alternate this between Hurl and Cleave and do massive area effect damage. So Dancing Toxic is brilliant for that. You can probably tell I'm a big fan of that Skurun. So anyway, Dancing Toxic is a good one to use. You've then got Lava Spread, which is for fire damage. It's fine too. It's great if you're in a fire build and you don't have the nature. And then also Frozen Shield is definitely a little bit weaker. It has the slow effect too. It's not super useful, but that's for water builds. There is one there too. Now we're looking at Rumble. So the best Skurun for Rumble is Volcano Eruption. And if we just compare it to, say, Consecration, which is probably the second best, the damage from the initial hit is roughly similar. It's a little bit bigger on Volcano Eruption. And the main difference here is you've got the damage over time from Volcano Eruption. 7 hits of 208 out of 28,000 is really big. That's roughly 200,000, which is like 200% onto the 100%, 130% there. We've got like 330%, is that? Yeah, roughly 40%, let's call it 340% compared to the 110%. It quite clearly turns this into a damage skill from the other ones, which are mainly as an area effect stun. Now the problem comes where the area it hits is so small. So if we look at Consecration, and this is the true for all the Skuruns on this skill, it hits quite a big area. Doesn't quite catch those when I stand here, but basically it does a big area effect hit and stun. And then the Volcano Eruption, the area is drastically reduced to just hit this small area, and the fire itself is a tiny area. So it can be a really powerful fire damage skill, and it's probably the biggest pull to have a fire build. This is the biggest benefit. But to use it, you have to be right next to the enemy, and the enemy has to not move. So it typically works in PvE against bosses. Most bosses will stay still, and you can just go up to them and use this. In PvP, it's not so good because people will run away from it. I've heard from knights that they don't like it that much, but this is a powerful fire skill. So if you have a fire build, you want to be using this skill rune, and you want to get used to using it. I'm just a little hesitant about raving about it because it's tricky to use. But anyway, it is the best Skurun for the skill because the skill itself is not the most viable. It's big area stun is not that great these days. You want to kind of tank and then do damage, and stunning enemies is not so much. But it does have a long stun in PvP of 2.5 seconds, so you can use it for that. Consecration, like I said, it's probably the best one for it. It does the stun, it does the damage. The damage is not important. The important bit here, the benefit of Consecration, is you get a little heal and you get a little move speed buff, which means it's great for getting you out of tricky situations, which is probably where you want to use the skill if you are using it. The other worthy of note one here is Aftershocks. Aftershocks is a little complicated. When you use it, then you get 3 hits roughly behind you or 3 extra hits. So if we use this, I should actually stand in the middle. I was trying to show with the chicken, but basically after you use it, you hit the big area, and then you get 3 more hits, which you can see on the ground as these little marks. They go behind you. In this map, in town, behind you is seen as over here, so that's why it goes behind you there. But in a map, it will be wherever behind you is when you enter the map. Anyway, point is, it does these extra hits, which, as you can see, hit that snowman there. It hits almost a larger area, because where they mark on the ground, that's the centre of another hit that is the same size as the initial one you do. So not only does it hit a very slightly larger area, mainly behind you, but slightly off to the sides, the main thing is those come out over time, and so when you're farming, as enemies are chasing after you, they will get hit by the aftershocks. So it's definitely the best farming Skurun, and this skill in general is good for farming, so Aftershocks is good for that there. You don't really need to level it up for that though, because you don't need the extra damage when you're farming too much. Maybe you need to level up a little bit, I don't know. But yeah, it's good for that. So the next skill to talk about is Spikes. Now, Ice Needles is way better than the other ones, and it's not so obvious. If you look at Ice Needles next to Ember Glow here, you wouldn't realise that Ice Needles is way better, and the reason is that all the other Skuruns don't crit with the damage that they do from the element from the Skurun. So the base damage from the skill does crit, always, no matter what Skurun you have in it. However, the elemental damage added by the Skurun doesn't crit on all of them, except for nice Ice Needles. This is one of the big benefits for playing with water, having a water build. I talked about Lord of Winter, it's a great water boost. We've got Flowing Blades, it's the best main Skurun. But Ice Needles is, I would argue, the best reason to have a water build. And it's because the damage from it is surprisingly good. 75% water damage every hit you take. It says on every 5th hit, but that's the extra thing that doesn't matter that much. It's basically every hit you take, you do damage, which is 400% if you have spikes maxed, plus the 75% water, which if you've got a high water stat, that's actually considerable damage. And this Skurun becomes very interesting in PvP, fighting other knights. If you have Enrage on, if you have, say, Lord of Winter on, you have Ice Needles, you can be you're set up to do a lot of water damage, and every time they hit you, they're taking these big water hits in return. So it's a great way for taking down other knights. Just having a good water stat and having Ice Needles on, you're going to really do a lot of damage to them in return. So Ice Needles, probably the best Skurun here. Well, without a doubt, the best Skurun here. The other ones, because they don't do damage, it's just about the extra effects. Emberglow and Thornskin, they both have the useful extra effect of every 7th hit you take, it pulls in enemies and slows them. It's very similar to the effect which we have from Sparkling Gift. I would say you don't need it if you're using Sparkling Gift anyway, because Sparkling Gift has such a short cooldown, you can pull enemies in whenever you want. You don't need this from the Skurun. However, if you're using a fire or nature charge to do some damage there, then it's pretty useful to have either Emberglow or Thornskin to pull enemies in, because you're not doing that otherwise. So they're useful for that. I wouldn't use them otherwise. I would always use Ice Needles if you're using Sparkling Gift. Now we move to Whirl. Whirl is all about damage, and basically the fire, water and nature are all very similar, doing about 80% plus 18,000 damage. The fire and the water and nature both also slow enemies, which is quite useful. Not a huge amount though. It's 30% is kind of handy, but nothing too special. The main thing here is the damage. So I would say all 3 Skuruns are very equivalent. You just pick whichever one is best for your build or best for the content you're doing. Next is Protector. So I said both Death Protection and Water's Protection are equivalent. You pick the one that your build is better for, or that you want for the content. However, it's not so much about the damage, it's more about the healing here. So this only happens as a chance on basic attacks, and the way I choose to play Knight myself, I don't use basic attacks too much, I use a lot of skills. So you won't really trigger this too much if you're doing that, which is why I say it's not really about the damage. However, what this means is every few hits, It's every few seconds if you're attacking. Roughly every 3 to 5 seconds I found it will trigger and it will do a bit of damage around you. It's fine damage, but not really much compared to skills. However, it heals you by 15%. So this is pretty cool with the Protector because this is only happening while you've got Protector on. So you're not taking too much damage while you've got Protector on, and then healing by 15% is actually very useful at that time. It makes you very difficult to kill. You can also think of this kind of like lifesteal because, you know, doing basic attacks, you heal yourself from lifesteal. This is like an extra heal from that, so it like sort of boosts your lifesteal. Anyway, these are the two that I would say are the best. Both kind of equivalent. You just pick whichever one's better for your build, and then the other ones are not worthy of note at all. In Rage here, now this is a more complicated one, and one which I think a lot of people will be wrong about. I might have misled people in a previous video. I think it was when I was talking about best Skurrun's for Night in the past. I messed up and I said the wrong Skurrun. So Freezing Rage is one which a lot of people were focusing on and think is the best. However, it is not. I would never use Freezing Rage at Rage. And hopefully you'll agree with me once you've listened to me go on a rant about it now. So Freezing Rage, when it triggers, it then deals 10 hits of 5,400 water to nearby enemies. 5,400 is not much. That's only 54,000 with the 10 hits, which is like, you know, if we think in the future about having 100,000 damage, that's equivalent of like 50% water, which most damage skills on Knight, when you use them and the elemental damage from them is like 200%. So 50% is like 1/4 of another skill. It's just not worth your time at all. Like, that is not good damage. And that's all that Skurrun adds. Demon's Rage, on the other hand, what this does is surprisingly good. So talking quickly first about it, the armor buff. The armor buff, you can get 4 stacks of 25%, basically plus 100% armor. And that is not that much because you already have the plus 300% or plus 200% PvP from spikes, as well as the passive giving you 100%. So going from 500 to 600 or 400 to 500, it's useful, but it's not actually enormous, and not the main reason why you'd use it. I would not focus in on the defense buff. It's just a useful little buff on top of other things. The main thing is the damage buff. Now, the skill itself, at 10 out of 99, you don't get any damage buff. If you take this to 99, then you get a damage buff of 100%. That and the Skurrun do not stack on top of each other. You can only get a maximum 100% damage buff from the skill plus the Skurrun. Which means, which is the reason why a lot of people don't like the Skurrun, because they think, oh, it's useless then, because I already get the damage buff from the skill, so the Skurrun does nothing. Well, that's where you go wrong, because the damage buff from the Skurrun continues after the skill's finished. It goes for 10 seconds, and remember, of course, it only triggers when you get hit, so it's not going to happen instantly. It's going to happen over the course of a few seconds while the skill's active. So what happens is you use the skill, for 7 seconds you get auto crit plus 100% damage, and during that time you'll get hit a bit, and you'll get this Skurrun triggered. You'll get the armor buff, blah blah blah, doesn't matter. You get the damage buff for 10 seconds from when that's triggered. So let's say, well, basically the way this works in practice is that it extends your damage buff 100% from 7 seconds to more like 12 to 15 seconds. It nearly doubles the length of the damage buff. It doesn't double the length of the auto crit, but the benefit of that damage buff being extended is enormous. And of course that's on top of the defense buff as well. Demon's Rage is a brilliant Skurrun, and I'm sorry if I misled people and said Freezing Rage was good in the past. I used it in a particular case trying to do a lot of burst damage where Demon's Rage wouldn't help, so I did it for efficiency in that. However, actually that kind of misled people. So anyway, Demon's Rage is the best Skurrun for Enrage by a long shot. It's for the damage output. It's also got defense buff in it too, and it's about extending that damage buff beyond the 7 seconds. If you don't have the skill at 99, if you have it at just 10, then it's an obvious choice, because this is where you can get the damage buff, and it won't happen instantly, but when you start to get hit, then for the next 10 seconds you're going to have a damage buff. Next skill to talk about is Holy Shield. This is one of my favourites when it comes to Skurruns. Both of these Skurruns are basically the same. It's not about damage. These are the only two which you should consider, and you just pick whichever one. It doesn't matter. So the reason why they're amazing is they add this extra effect, which is after the shield ends, which the shield from the skill is quite small, it's not that great, it's kind of useful. When that bursts, you then get 40% damage reduction for 5 seconds. It says 0.4, but it's 40%. And that 40% damage reduction is enormous. Combine that with any other damage reduction effects, and you're just tanking like crazy. You can spam this skill quite frequently. It's only 15 second cooldown, and the shield would last a few seconds. You then get the buff for 5 seconds, and with cooldown reduction, I mean, what does it become? We've got the skill in the class now. Oh no, I haven't got the cooldown reduction. Anyway, basically, it you can use it very frequently, and you get I've lost my track here. You get the damage reduction buff. It just helps you tank really nicely in all bits of content. So either one of these you get, do that, and it will become a brilliant skill. Frenzy here, this buffs your attack speed. It's not the most exciting skill. The skill runes add interesting things onto them. There are 2 skill runes worthy of note. One is for PvE, one for PvP. So Inquisitor is for PvE, and that is what it adds is every 3rd hit you will do a little bit of damage. The damage is pathetic. It basically heals you by a little under 10%. So every 3rd hit you heal by a little under 10%. It also boosts your attack speed here, so you're going to be doing this more frequently. Like I said, I like to use skills more than basic attacks. However, if you need a bit more healing in your build, Inquisitor is brilliant for that, for putting it on, and then for the next bit of time, whenever you need to heal, just do a few basic attacks and you're going to heal up. It just basically boosts your lifesteal to make that stronger, and can be pretty nice. It's also worth noting both these skill runes have plus 3% move speed. It's highly important to get one of them up and leave it equipped the whole time for that extra boost. 3% move speed is so useful in the class, just to move around a little bit faster, helps you a lot, especially nights where you've got to move into enemies quickly. And actually, I say that, you've got charge, but move speed is brilliant in the game. You've got to have as much as you can. The Thrill of the Hunt is for PvP, and specifically for taking out wizards. So this is the silence skill rune, and what's really important to note here is, in PvP, when you get stunned, when the stun ends, you then get 5 seconds of immunity before you can get stunned again. Silence works differently. I believe the way it works is when it ends, then you get 1 second of immunity before you can get silenced again. So this skill rune, you only need to do 3 hits after you activate it to silence the enemy. It's guaranteed 3rd hit, you silence the enemy. You also get the attack speed boost, so you can attack them a little bit faster. So if you use this on a wizard, you go up to them, use the skill, hit them 3 times, they get silenced for 2 seconds. Learn the timing, you want to practice that for 2 or 3 seconds, wait before then doing a few more basic attacks, and then you carry on with your skills again. And that 1 second window, it's incredibly hard for a wizard to do anything during that 1 second window. I speak from being on the receiving end of it. This skill almost completely locks down wizards. They can't really use any skills for the time when they get silenced, and it's just brilliant for keeping a wizard still, because they can't teleport away, and unable to use any defense buffs. If you catch them when their defense buffs are ending, they become helpless. It's great for killing wizards, and a good skill rune. So those are the 2 worthy of note on Frenzy and how you can use them to best suit you. The 2 worthy of note on Lay on Hands. The best one is Protective Waves. This adds 100% health shield on top of the full heal, so it just makes this incredibly good for tanking. Like, no matter what situation you're in, use Protective Waves. You're full health, massive shield on top of you. You're not going to die anytime soon. Makes the skill really good, and the skill, if you've seen my previous videos, you'll know I'll say it's not the best to use in PvE, but PvP it's brilliant. And with this particular skill rune, it just becomes insane in PvP for helping you survive. If you use it, like the other person may as well just run, because you've reset and you can't be hurt for the next few seconds really because of that shield. It used to win a lot of games in early days in PvP. If someone used Protective Waves, that was it. The other person couldn't do much. Now there's a bit more healing on other classes, so they can try and survive longer. But anyway, big move for PvP. Grimlaw here, either Grimlaw or Divine Law, they're both the same, and the reason why you want to use this is for farming, because it adds damage, so it hits a huge area, and it also buffs your move speed, which is not worth using just to buff your move speed because of the animation. However, if you can use it at a time when you hit a load of enemies, you kill them off, and also buff your move speed, then it's worth it to use in farming. The cooldown is long, but there can be a particular point in a run where you use it each time. Next skill is Dual Wield. The runes for this pretty simple. There's Nature, Light, and Shadow, all very equivalent, dealing damage per hit and the chance for an extra bit of damage in a burst. You just pick whichever one's best for your build or best for the content. You go with that. The three are equivalent, and there's none other ones worthy of note. Angelic Form. We talked about this a couple of times already. Lord of Winter boosting your water stat by 200% is enormous, and the best rune for this, I would say, in the vast majority of cases. It makes water builds work really nicely, means they can do massive damage. If you use Lord of Winter and Enrage, then you can do a huge Flowing Blades, or otherwise just do great water damage for the next few seconds. Anyway. So Lord of Winter, generally you want to use it. A Blaze Soul is basically for the times when you don't have any water skills on your class. So say you're doing a nature build or you're doing a fire build and you don't actually use any water skills, then there's no point using Lord of Winter because all it does is boost your water. So Blaze Soul, what it does is when you get hit, you heal a little bit. So it basically makes you tank a bit better. Angelic Form's so powerful already that you don't need a Blaze Soul, but it is beneficial if you're not using water skills. There's also the mild benefit, which, why I say mild, I think it's actually pretty major, which is it's not that obvious. So if you use Lord of Winter, you go all angelic, it's pretty obvious. If you use a Blaze Soul, you just go on fire. And in PvP, when all the animation's going on, it's actually very hard to see when someone uses a Blaze Soul. So it might be worth using simply for the reason that you can't see when it's used, because a lot of people will just run away from you when you use Angelic Form or Lord of Winter because they see that you're not going to really take any damage for the next few seconds. Whereas if you use a Blaze Soul, they don't see that, so they'll continue attacking and staying next to you, which is what you want, because then you can be attacking them. And it can be great from hiding that. So if you're not using water skills that much, it might be worth thinking about using a Blaze Soul instead in PvP to hide the fact when you use it. Now the last skills are the advanced skills, which haven't really got developed runes, but there are a few that are worthy of note. So if you're doing water or nature, Sever becomes quite a bit better with these two water and nature runes. They're both the same. Then we've got the shadow one for Sunder. This basically makes Sunder really good. Ironically, there's no good shadow rune for Maim, so this, if you're a shadow build, is basically your shadow Maim. It is surprisingly good, and it's probably the biggest benefit from being shadow build is using this Dark Sunder. So that's pretty cool. Just basically does big hit. And then we've got Reflect, similar to Sever. We've got Water and Nature here. Can make it work better. I probably wouldn't use this skill unless I was a Water or Nature build, and you can get the extra bonus from here, just like with Sever. And then Royal Blade only has one rune. This rune is not any good. Don't bother with this. Just do it for the extra stats, the damage, armor, and dodge rating. If you've done everything else. So that covers all those runes. I hope that makes it pretty clear about what they do. And we've got this table here for reference to see which ones are the best ones, which ones are the other ones that are worthy of note. If I don't show it in this table, it is not worth leveling up for any reason. I might have shown a couple of other ones in the game there, but basically the ones that are in this table are the ones that are worth leveling up. So now we've got a couple more things to do in this video. First one is to talk about the order of leveling up the runes. Now this is not a strict order, it is just random advice, and in fact Knight is a little bit more complicated than the other two classes because there are two things to really take into account here. You can either go, just to explain, this is for new players who haven't got any runes, which ones do you do first, which ones the most important ones. And there are two ways of doing this. Either you want to go down the water route, and you want to go with Lord of Winter, some water runes, and go for some water damage, because that's great early on if you don't have any ways to any elemental stats. So you don't have any fire build or nature build. You can basically make a water build out of the runes that are there. The other way of doing it is to basically get up the good runes that will help you in the long run because they're the best ones, or they're some fire, some well, sorry, I say fire. Some nature, some shadow, some water. Getting the best screw-ins that are there because you don't have any particular element that you're going for, or maybe you're getting them all up or whatever. There are those two different routes. So I've tried to appeal to both of those. Now, the first screw-in I would say is definitely the most important, is getting either Shield of Light or Shield of Frost. Makes that skill worthwhile and makes it one of the best skills. Means that your defense is just going to be brilliant on Knight, and then your defense is kind of solid and you can focus on damage things. So, Shield of Light or Shield of Frost. Next, I would say, is a Cleave screw-in. Cleave is probably the most important damage skill, especially early on, and so Dual Scythe is the best one. Empowered Water Cleave if you want to go for the water kind of build that I said. If you've got a fire build, then maybe actually get the fire screw-in for that, or the nature one, or whatever. Basically, get a Cleave screw-in. That will help you out most. Next is Flowing Blades. Again, if you're doing other builds, you could get different elements, but Flowing Blades is the best maim screw-in, and maim is brilliant as well. So getting both Cleave and maim will sort you out nicely. Dancing Toxic, similar to the other ones. You could get the other different elements for Hurl, but having Cleave, maim, and Hurl is going to set you up really nicely for damage output after you've got the defense from the Holy Shield here. Next is Demon's Rage, I would say, for the brilliant damage boost. You also then don't need the 99 skill points, because if you're newer to the game, you won't have all those skill points, and you want to focus on spikes, getting skill points in that first before in Rage. So Demon's Rage is going to get you access to that damage boost earlier on, and otherwise it's great in the long run as well. It's the best screw-in to have in that. So I would say basically get this one defense screw-in and then focus on damage with these things, getting the skills and then getting a Rage for the damage boost. And then Lord of Winter, if you've gone with the water build, then you can have Lord of Winter here as well, and then that will improve your damage further for massive burst damage. You could set yourself up really quite nicely early on just with these water screw-ins and then Demon's Rage and Lord of Winter. So yeah, that's what I would choose to do personally if I were to go into it and start the game and play Knight. I'd probably do that kind of order for my screw-ins. Now, the last thing we're going to do in this video is we're going to look at how each element stands up in terms of what they have for damage output. This is an extract from a thread on the forum which you can't see. It's what I've written to Rumble, so that if they do develop screw-ins further, that they can look at this and they can see kind of where I would choose to put different elements and trying to round them all up. Because what we're thinking about here is if someone new comes to the game and say all elements are available to them, they can pick any element they want. I think it's good if no matter which element they pick, they have a viable setup, so they don't pick light, go down the light route and then realise light is nowhere near as good as the other elements. So I'm saying this is what needs to be added to the game in order to make each of the elements roughly equivalent or viable, so that nobody feels like they've been left out. So we have this up here, the major damage dealers first of all, and then the secondary damage dealers. This is very similar to the way I split it in my last video, where I talked about all the skills. It's excluding the advanced skills because they don't really have screw-ins for them that have been developed right now. And then you can see this is what I'm recommending as the different elements, the different skills, and then what it would kind of end up in as comparing the different elements. So we're not going to talk about what I'm recommending here. We're just going to talk about this section and how each element stands. Go through the elements in order. So talking about fire first of all. Fire has a couple of the secondary damage dealers. It actually has the only rumble damage dealer, and that is pretty good. It's a little awkward to use, like I said, but it's definitely worthy to note. It's an appealing thing for fire. We've then got a whirl screw-in and a cleave screw-in. Now, notably, it's missing a few here. It's only got 2 of the major damage dealers, which is why fire works quite nicely, but not super well. It has got a maim that is weaker than the other ones. So it has got that screw-in there, but it's also got a hurl as well, actually. That's a weaker one. So it's got these screw-ins. It can do it. It's just not quite as good as water and nature in terms of the screw-ins that are available. The next element we're going to talk about is water. Now, water does not have any secondary damage dealers, very weirdly, but it has all the major damage dealers apart from hurl. It does have a screw-in there, but it's not that good. But the maim it has is the best. It's got a solid cleave. It's got spikes, which no other element has, and that's a very good skill. And then it's got a very viable whirl. So water doesn't necessarily look like, on paper like it's the best, but it is very, very good. We've also got to remember that it's got Lord of Winter, which is always going to boost it a little bit more than the other elements. Then looking at nature. So nature has dual wield here. It has it's bad selecting. It has dual wield here. It has charge, which you wouldn't really use because you're using Sparkling Gift, but there is a nature damage output there. And then here again, similar to water, it has 4 out of 5. The only one it's missing is spikes. And here it's got hurl, which is a huge addition and very, very powerful. So nature, it looks on paper like it's got more than water, and in terms of numbers, maybe it has more than water, but it's just a little bit weaker main. It's weaker main. The cleave, I think, is weaker too. The water does have a hurl, even though it's quite a bit weaker. It doesn't have spikes, which is a big deal. So it's a little bit weaker all round, and it hasn't got the Lord of Winter. It's a big thing to note as well. But yeah, nature is very nicely set up. And in fact, when it comes to what I'm recommending, you'll notice that there is no nature at all. I think nature's set up very nicely, even though water's slightly better. Nature has the most well-rounded Skuruns. It's just, it doesn't have to be the best. And then the next element we'll talk about is Shadow. So Shadow has a couple of these, Frenzy and Dual Wield here. That Frenzy is the PvP one, which is actually very viable. It's also got the best Cleave. It's notably missing everything else on the major damage dealers, which is the big problem, and why I would say it's not worth doing a Shadow build, but it's good for supporting because you can get a slightly better Cleave. When you're using Frenzy in PvP, you're going to do a little bit more, and it's got the Sunder skill as well, which no other element has. So Shadow can do quite a lot of work. It can be pretty useful, but it's not good as a main build. It's just good for supporting. And lastly, we'll talk about Light. Now, Light has 3 out of 4 of the secondary damage dealers, which is, kind of exciting. It's also got the best charge here, the charge which you probably want to use the whole time. However, when you look at the main damage dealers, it has a Light Skurun, but then nothing else. I mean, it literally doesn't have a Cleave, which is the main problem. Cleave, like I said, is probably the most important damage skill on the class, and not having a Skurun for Cleave in Light is a really big issue. So Light, as it is on every class, is the weakest by far. It just hasn't had the proper support. In fact, originally Light and Shadow were going to be rarer Skuruns that were more powerful, and there was certainly a stage in the game where that was the case, but then they decided to just flood the game with Skuruns, and with good Skuruns, and they did that for all the elements apart from Light and Shadow, and then later they added some Shadow stuff for a bit of Shadow support, but they didn't add Light stuff. So Light has ended up being a lot further behind the other elements. That's just how it's turned out. So that's each of the elements and where they kind of stand in terms of damage output from, as best as I can. A little bit of analysis here. That rounds off this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it and learnt a lot about the Night Skuruns and what's worthy of note, what you're going to do. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'm going to be doing next with my videos on the channel for KingsRoad. You would have noticed I bring out Neo Monsters videos. I'm supporting both the games with videos, so you'll see various Neo Monsters videos coming up. But in terms of the KingsRoad videos that I'm going to be bringing out, the next videos I'm going to be bringing out are going to be kind of useful tip stuff. So there will be a video talking about inventory management or storage management. That is, which items to keep in the game and which ones to get rid of, and how to organize your inventory and vault in terms of which items go in which and where to put them in order to just use the storage space very well. It's one of those topics that I thought people wouldn't be that interested in until then. I thought about it and I thought, actually, there's probably some useful tips I could give. And then when I mention it to people, they're like, you know what, that would be very useful because I have a lot of random junk that I keep. And there are certain things that people have learned over time that are really useful ways of laying things out for them to really work well. So I'm going to do a video talking about how I choose to do it and how I think it's best done, that I hope will help a lot of people out. And doesn't sound like the most exciting topic, but it will be useful. Then we've got a video which I'm going to do for each class, talking about the best set effects for each class. That's both the Fabled Gloves and the Fabled Rings, because you would have known if you've been following me recently that I've been, for the last year or two, every time there's a new set that comes out with a set effect, I release information about it, I update my guides, I've got guides listing all the set effects, and in fact it's become quite obvious with time that people are not really sure which set effects are best. I list the best ones in my guides, but it's slightly different depending on which class you play, and then it's like depending on the content you're playing, that kind of stuff. So I'm going to make a video for each class talking about which are the best set effects and what kind of, decisions you need to make in order to decide which to use for which content. That should be useful for people, I think. Now, after I've done those videos, the next videos I'm going to be doing will be PvP. PvP has been something which I haven't done on the channel for about 2 years, and it's long overdue. I've got lots of random clips from long in the past, some of myself playing, some of Archer's playing that has been sent to me, some of me playing as Archer, not on my account but on my girlfriend's account. And so what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to do one video for each class again, talking about how to play that class in PvP. I made a video quite a long time ago called What is the PvP Meta? And in that video I talked for each class. I did it for all three, and it's like 45 minutes long, me talking about 50 minutes on each class, saying how to play that class, what interactions are doing, how to counteract certain things other classes are doing. I'm going to do that class specific now, one video for each, where I put in as much information as I can, as concisely as possible, for playing that class really well in PvP, and just trying to give as many tips as I can. And so after those 3 videos where I give you all my tips for PvP, I'm then going to be releasing the PvP footage in a number of videos, and that's going to be with commentary and stuff. I'm going to have to review the footage to work out exactly how many I'm going to do, whether I'm going to get some more footage. But anyway, there's going to be some PvP content for wizards and archers coming out at that time. Now, after all that's done, there is one more thing that I have planned, and actually 2 more things. Yeah, true. Okay, this goes a long way. So the next plans will be farming videos. I want to do a farming video for each class, talking about how best to farm them, and showing it for both Animal's Gold Circle and Animal's Gold Sanctum. And just the best techniques for those. I've done that kind of stuff long in the past, but mainly for Wizard. So we're going to show it for each of the 3 classes, doing a video on each. And then lastly, if I do get to it, I might change plans and do something else. But lastly, I would like to do dragon reviews. I planned this a very long time ago, going through about 3 dragons in each video. And I'm going to go through all the dragons, talk about how they work, how to use them, that kind of stuff. So that is the overall plans, which is probably more than a year's worth of videos. I don't know exactly. It might be the plans for the whole of 2020. Depends, how long those dragon videos will go, and like what I do with the other videos. But that is my ultimate plan for KingsRoad videos. If there's anything you'd like me to include or change, then write it in the description below. In a comment below. I'm very open to ideas. Most of these ideas are from people in the community. That some of them get put off by about a year, but that's my plan for the long run. Everything that I want to make for KingsRoad, and we'll see how it goes. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in another video soon.